So this woman's face has been burned into my memory, and now I'd like it to be burned into yours, if you fit into one of the groups that I'm about to address here. Her name is Noah. She is one of over 100 women, children, and even elderly people who were kidnapped this last weekend by a group of religious extremists and rapists known as Hamas. Now, I want everyone out there who claims to believe in women's rights, LGBT rights, human rights, who claims to be a progressive, to pay attention right now. Everyone who was up in arms a few months ago when the viciously woman-hating dictatorship of Iran was brutalizing, raping, and murdering hundreds of women simply for the crime of wanting the freedom to be able to walk around and exist without being forced to wear a hijab. But then a few months later, you see that same violently misogynistic regime providing the vast majority of the money and the weapons for an attack that began with a mass murder and brutally violent rape of Jewish women in Israel, the kidnapping, murder of babies, even shooting people's family dogs, dragging an elderly Holocaust survivor in her wheelchair into Gaza, in an attack that was the single biggest mass murder of Jewish people since we were almost exterminated in the Holocaust. And your only response to all that is hashtag free Palestine, y'all. For example, here's a post made by Black Lives Matter Chicago, shared by people I know who should really know better, glorifying the racists who entered Israel by parachute, and at the same time being very, very, very racist and disrespectful to Palestinians by equating their flag with those racists who were brutalizing and torturing the people of Gaza at the same time as they are torturing Israelis. Okay, so you want freedom for Palestinians. I agree. And I don't just say that by putting out meaningless gestures and hashtags. I don't just say I'm against the occupation. I actually went to the West Bank. I volunteered with human rights groups to help elderly Palestinians get through Israeli army checkpoints that shouldn't be there in the first place so they could get to the hospital for medical care. In particular, I'll never forget riding in an ambulance with this elderly gentleman who was suffering very badly from a kidney stone, which is a very powerful experience for me because my grandfather, who managed to survive the Nazis in Europe, actually died in Israel as a result of not getting medical treatment fast enough for a kidney stone. So don't think for a second that I don't respect the lives of Palestinians. Absolutely abhor the occupation and believe that Palestinians deserve the same human rights that we all deserve. I know for a fact, as a Jewish person, that Palestinians are my family because I've gotten a DNA test and was 0% surprised that, of course, all of us Semites are very closely related to each other. But you know who really doesn't give a fuck about Palestinian freedom or the lives of innocent people in Gaza? Motherfucking Hamas, the gang of fucking rapists whose actions, for some reason, so many people are now trying to bend over backwards and act as apologists for. Because they are religious fundamentalists who don't believe in any kind of secular freedoms. They torture and murder anybody in Gaza who tries to use their freedom of speech to criticize their rule. They murder gay people for the crime of being born. And I can only imagine how these fascists treat their wives and daughters. And so anyone with a functioning brain in your skull needs to ask yourself now, if we've seen this conflict between Israel and Hamas over and over again, and every single time Hamas shoots rockets at Israel, often intentionally from the roofs of hospitals and schools and civilian apartment buildings. And every time Israel fires back with even greater force, resulting in horrible misery and suffering and loss of life in Gaza. Why would anyone who cared about their own people think about doing that yet again? And this time committing mass rape and think that it's going to result in anything other than Israel responding on an unprecedented scale? There are two answers to that question, and both of them are extremely sinister. But they also explain exactly why the war started right now. The reason Iran is using Hamas in Gaza as a pawn right now is because Israel is on the verge of signing historic peace accords with Saudi Arabia. Now, Israel and Saudi Arabia making peace wouldn't be a silver bullet, wouldn't automatically lead to peace between Israelis and Palestinians, but there is no doubt in the long term it would be absolutely massively positive development for the Middle East and for the world as a whole. Because Saudi Arabia, as the global epicenter of Islam, it's the home of Mecca and Medina, and Saudi Arabia as an extremely wealthy and influential country, particularly in the Sunni world, could help other countries eventually make peace with Israel and help serve as a mediator between Israelis and Palestinians. Because the United States, who served as a mediator in the past, let's be honest, is 100% on Israel's side. So if you had a counterbalance of Arab countries who could help negotiations with the Palestinian interest in mind, maybe there could be a more fair peace deal eventually reached. Maybe the bloodshed could stop. Now, the second reason is even more fucked up. This is almost impossible for secular people, for atheists like me to understand. And before I visited the West Bank, I thought it was just right-wing propaganda. I'm very left-wing. I still am very left-wing and progressive. I thought it was just right-wing Israeli propaganda that, oh, these terrorists, they're insane. They think that when they kill Jews and when they get killed in the act of trying to kill Jews, they're going to go to heaven and get 72 virgins. And to me, that's just a bananas concept. So there's no way that an adult would believe that. Lo and behold, when I actually visited the West Bank, you realize that there are some people there who sadly 100% believe that. Because according to their interpretation of their religion, if you die in war with the enemies, if you become a shaheed, a martyr, you go directly to heaven. So for them, as soon as the lights go out from an Israeli bullet, don't worry about it because you're going to meet your 72 virgins. Now, if I had one piece of advice to everyone who's commenting on the war between Israel and Hamas without really having any idea what the fuck you're talking about, or thinking this is like a presidential debate or a sport where you're supposed to take sides, just turn your brain off and root for one side or the other like it's a fucking game. This would be my advice. First of all, turn your brain back on. Recognize your identity as a human being first and foremost. And as my DNA test and as everybody's DNA test will illustrate, your notion of ethnicity and nationality exists as an idea in your head, a lot more than it exists as a reality in your blood, which by definition is always going to be closely related to the DNA of your neighbors, which are the countries that live side by side with each other and therefore often go to war with each other. Always choose to be on the side of the people first, of innocent people, regardless of nationality. If you support Jewish people's right to exist in the land where we came from, free from mass murder and at the hands of these terrorists, first of all, thanks, I guess, for not being a Nazi. But just because you're not a Nazi or a Hamas supporter, which nowadays is effectively the same thing based on their actions after they've orchestrated the biggest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust. But just because you're a decent human being who's disgusted with Hamas and all religious fundamentalist terrorists, you can also stop feeling a need to justify all the actions of Israel's ultra-right-wing government, which is itself allied with religious fundamentalists who on a daily basis continue to terrorize our Palestinian relatives in the West Bank, demolishing the homes of innocent people to expand their settlements based on what they think the Bible tells them to do. Don't feel a need to justify depriving innocent men, women, and children and cats in the Gaza Strip of food, water, and medicine as some sort of barbaric collective punishment against every human being and cat in the Gaza Strip, just because of the actions of a specific group of people who are themselves already brutalizing and oppressing people of Gaza. Somebody who's been there to both sides of the wall, I can tell you that the vast majority of Israelis and Palestinians just want to live their fucking lives, just want to live in peace, and for all this horrible bloodshed and warfare to be over. But it is the religious fundamentalists on both sides who keep dragging everyone else into their ancient biblical blood feuds. Shalom, salam, and peace to all my Israeli and Palestinian family.